Last time we spoke about the First Zhili-Fengtian War. Wu Peifu and Jang Toolin became swift rivals after the First Zhili-Fengtian War. The Zhili clique remained in control of Beijing and began bullying everyone else into submission, trying to unify China under their thumb. Jang Toolin went to work reorganizing and retraining his army, for another war was looming over the horizon. Then in southeast China, a conflict emerged between Jiangsu and Zhejiang provinces. The Zhili clique warlord Chu Yuan wanted to control Shanghai, which was under the control of Lu Yongxiang of the Anhui clique. The Anhui clique was pretty much on its deathbed. Zhejiang province was the very last one under their control, thus he elected to fight for it. Lu Yongxiang sought help from anybody who possibly could help him, such as Jang Toolin and Dr. Sun Yat-sen, but little did he know he was contributing to a much larger war. This episode is the Second Zhili-Fengtian War. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia. Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia, and so much more, so we'll give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all of that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube. Over there, I'm releasing a new series on the Japanese invasion of North China and Inner Mongolia. Also, please check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where for as little as $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive Patreon podcast, early access to all of my content, and voting rights for what we'll tackle next. Trust me, I put a lot of effort into my Patreon. I think it's worth your time. Hello again. So after the First Zhili-Fengtian War of 1922, the Zhili warlords seized control over Beijing. Cao Kun bribed his way into the presidency as Jang Toolin licked his wounds and he went back to Manchuria, where he rebuilt his entire army. Jang Toolin appointed Yang Yuqing as Inspector General of the Mukden Arsenal and Wang Yingtai as Director of the Department of Materials. He began purchasing more Renault FT tanks, increased his military production, now seeing 150 artillery pieces, 1,000 machine guns, 60,000 rifles, 100,000 artillery shells, and 600,000 rifle rounds being pumped out of his factories annually. He increased his navy and air force, naming his son Zhang Shuliang as director of the aviation office. He purchased German and Italian aircraft, nearly 300 planes within 4 groups. Air bases and fields were built alongside naval headquarters and training schools in places like Harbin. To improve communications, additional water and coal supply stations were built in Suzhou, Xincheng, and Dayaogao, so he could quickly deploy troops via rail. Roads were further developed to increase transportation in areas without rail. Each army was given wire communications such as a telegraph or a telephone line, linking them to their general headquarters. Radio communication units were also developed. Radio stations were built in Shenyang, Harbin, and Jin County. The Fengtian military was reformed. Commanders like Bao Dushan and Xu Changyou, who were blamed for losing the First Zhili-Fengtian War, were court-martialed and executed in the spring of 1923. The rising star, dog-meat general himself, Zhang Zongchang, aided Jang Toolin by massively recruiting White Russians, who brought over all sorts of expertise and skills. The White Russians were commanded by Konstantin Petrovich Nikiev. Alongside them, Zhang Zongchang also hired Japanese units. The Fengtian army expanded to 27 brigades from its original 25, organized into 3 armies of 3 divisions. Each division had 3 brigades. The cavalry was expanded from 3 to 4 divisions, with 3 brigades forming a division and the rest attached to infantry divisions as cavalry companies. The artillery regiments expanded from 4 to 10. Each division consisted of 3 brigades with either an infantry brigade or a combined brigade, and every division had an engineering battalion and a transportation battalion attached. Combined brigades were bolstered with an engineering company and a transportation company. All said and done, the strength of the Fengtian army totaled more than 250,000 troops. and his performance was significantly improved. The very best troops would be found in the 2nd Brigade, commanded by Zhang Toolin, and the 6th Brigade, commanded by Guo Lin. They were viewed as the very model units of the Fengtian army. Now, as we saw, the catalyst for what would be known as the Second Zhili-Fengtian War occurred on September the 3rd of 1924, that being the First Jiangsu-Zhejiang War. When Lu Yongxiang of Zhejiang refused to cede administration of Shanghai to Chu Yuan, both Jang Toolin and Dr. Yat-sen pledged to defend the neutrality of Zhejiang Province, and they ended up pulling everybody into a larger war. On September the 4th, Dr. Yat-sen held a meeting at his mansion in Guangzhou. There he announced he would assist Zhejiang to preserve Guangdong. Thus, he was enacting the Northern Expedition. His plan for the Northern Expedition was to first attack Jiangxi Province. After this, he would conquer Anhui. From there, the KMT forces would link up with the Zhejiang forces near the Jinpu Road, where they could march north to take Beijing. On September the 5th, Dr. Yat-sen publicly denounced Cao Kun and Wu Peifu, and he asked the people of Guangdong to work harder than they ever had, so that they could eliminate the warlords and China could be ruled by her people again. On September the 4th, in response to the war in the southeast, Jang Toolin declared war on the Zhili clique, on the grounds of being in an alliance with Zhejiang and Dr. Yat-sen. He also denounced Cao Kun, bringing up his bribery scheme. Jang Toolin's statement, and forgive me, it's poorly translated, went something like this. Curse Cao Kun, with power who bribed congressmen, raising teeth in claws and stole power. Cao Kun harms the people. Now I, Jang Toolin, in charge of Manchuria and her people, and who is loyal to the people, and is duty-bound, will lead the 3 armies to wipe out the thieves. On September the 9th, Duan Cede added his voice in a telegram against Cao Kun, accusing him of, quote, of not knowing who the country and the people are, what ethics, justice, and integrity are, and unleashing 4 provinces to attack Zhejiang, excluding dissidents, hurting innocent people, and greedy for his own dignity. You have committed a heinous sin, and you have gone too far. How can you survive? The virtuous and powerful people in the world, who have great responsibilities for a while, will definitely be able to do their duty and act bravely when they see justice. On the 15th of September, Jang Toolin issued another telegram to Cao Kun, in the form of an ultimatum. This year, natural disasters are prevalent, and hungry people are everywhere. I have tried to say that attacking Zhejiang is wrong, and I have the strength to respond in favor of peace. However, the ink has not yet dried. Yet at the same time, the Zhili marched into Fengtian, detaining Shananguan trains and blocking traffic. What was the purpose of this? In recent years, Cao Kun has been a puppet of Wu Peifu, which has caused public resentment. The impossibility of a military expedition is evident from the successive defeats of the Zhili army. We plan to send another envoy, but the train traffic has been cut off and we cannot enter Beijing. Therefore, we wait for the final answer. Indeed, on September the 13th, suddenly all the trains running along the Beijing-Fengtian Railway stopped on Zhili orders. The war in Zhejiang had provided Wu Peifu with the occasion to force a showdown with Jang Toolin. Wu Peifu felt confident he would win. Wu Peifu had mobilized over 250,000 troops divided into 3 armies. He trusted his military abilities, and he felt his subordinates were loyal to him, and he would be highly mistaken in that last part. It would turn out the Christian General Fang Yuang had major grievances. If you remember in the last episode, when Wu Peifu ordered Fang Yuang to attack Lu Yongxiang, Fang Yuang had refused. Instead, Fang Yuang weaved a web. He pulled Wang Huaiqing to his side, the Beijing garrison commander Sun Yue and Huo Qingyi. He complained to them about his army being slighted in the distribution of munition and supplies, and that he would move his troops very slowly out of Beijing when the war began. As it turns out, secret negotiations had been made. Jang Toolin's son, Zhang Shuliang, in the spring of 1923 had sent a letter to Fang Yuang via his most trusted subordinate, Fu Jingpei, who went to Beijing to secretly meet with him. Fu Jingpei met with Fang Yuang and his chief of staff, Liao Ji, at a secluded location in Nanyuan. The first meeting was brief, but fruitful, as follow-up meetings were made, now mediated through cede. Yes, cede brought the parties over to his personal residence in the Japanese quarter of Yat-sen. There, Fang Yuang was given a bribe between possibly 1 to 2.5 million Japanese yen. This bribe came from Jang Toolin's Japanese-supplied war chest. You see, Fang Yuang was having some financial troubles. He'd actually spent a few years begging a lot of other warlords for some loans and, just some help in the financial department. One of them was Cao Kun and Wu Peifu, neither of which actually gave him any support. Jang Toolin afterwards had every reason to believe Fang Yuang was in his pocket, so he concentrated most of his forces in areas he knew Fang Yuang would not be. And I'm actually going to take a bit of an awkward sidetrack here because I pre-write all of my scripts, obviously, and I want to note something because I've been reading a little bit more into it, and there's some things that I missed. Fang Yuang is going to actually do quite a lot to hurt the Zhili War effort at this moment. He's going to very slowly deploy to the battlefield in question. He's going to sever his own communications at times to not receive orders or thwart the orders going around near him. He's going to send contradicting reports that he's stationing his troops where he's supposed to or where he's not supposed to. He falsifies how many troops he's actually stationed at the front lines while he's actually sending troops to the rear. And in general, his whole purpose was to see how the battle was going, and once it seemed that the other side might have an upper hand or if his actions might help the other side win, it's then he's going to pull his troops to do something a little different than fighting the enemy, let's say. I just wanted to bring all this up because I didn't really write it into the script properly, I find, and I think it might clear things up a little bit. Just have it in mind that Fang Yuang is undermining the entire war. Yes, the quote-unquote Christian general that the foreign powers all loved was quite a treacherous dog. Now, the Zhili clique forces would come from the provinces of Henan, Shandong, Ruhe, known as Johor today, Chahar, and Chu Yuan. Meanwhile, the Fengtian would have troops from Jilin, Lu Yongxiang, and Fengtian. The second war certainly exceeds the first by a large margin, and it would also involve battles over land, sea, and air. The Zhili held an edge in numbers, but alienated generals would ultimately lose them the war. There was also an enormous technological gap between the Zhili and Fengtian armies. As I had mentioned, the Fengtian had purchased a lot of Western and Japanese weaponry and equipment. The Zhili clique purchased their weapons and materials mostly from Western nations, as well as the United States to some extent, but they were far behind the Fengtian. Furthermore, the Zhili clique had just experienced a series of small wars in Sichuan, Hunan, Fujian, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Guangdong provinces. Their troops were exhausted, lacked pay, and were kind of annoyed by everything that was ongoing. So needless to say, morale was not very high. Jang Toolin's Fengtian army faced 4 major objectives to see the Zhili clique defeated. Ultimately, they wanted to capture Beijing and Tianjin. Yet to do so, they would first need to retake Shanghai, so that their forces could enter Shijialing. Thus, Jang Toolin would need to gather his forces near Shanghai to capture it. This task fell to his 1st and 2nd Army, led by Jiang Dongxian and Zhang Shuliang. Now, if Shanghai could not be taken, at least 2 brigades would be needed in the Jianzhou region, where a railroad station was roughly 20 kilometers east of Shanghai. Once that region was secured, the main force could redeploy around Suzhou, so that a second attempt could be laid against Shanghai. Next, the 2nd Army would advance to Ruhe, Yi County, and Dayaogao. They would take Chaoyang, Jianping, Zhongde, and Ningyuan. Most of this responsibility would fall onto Zhang Zongchang's 3rd Combined Brigade and Li Jingling's 1st Division. After they completed this, they would enter the Longkao Pass, and then they would take Luanzhou. A Fengtian cavalry group would also attack Ruhe with the objective of taking Qifeng. The cavalry group would also cover the flank of other Fengtian forces and mop up the enemy left behind them. If the situation arose, a cavalry group could also attack along the Great Wall, via Shifengkou, or the Gubeikou Pass. The Fengtian reserve forces would be deployed between Xingcheng and Suzhou to guard Jinzhou. The Fengtian Air Forces headquartered at Shenyang would mobilize 3 groups for the war effort under the direct command of the 1st and 2nd Armies, known as the Combined Corps. Other air units would be deployed to Yi County under the command of Zhang Shuliang personally. Wu Peifu took the title of Commander-in-Chief, and he set up his headquarters in Sijiaotang. Wu Peifu made special arrangements for this battle. His first army would be led by, who would take an eastern route advancing along the Beijing-Fengcheng line to attack Liaoshen from Shanhaiguan. The second army of Wang Huaqing would advance along the middle route from Shikou to attack Ruichao. The third army of Feng Yuxiang would take the western route from the Gubeikou Pass to attack Kailu. Wu Peifu had also set up a commander-in-chief of the maritime defense, Zhang Shiqi, stationed at Shandong, and a naval commander-in-chief, Du Shuhai. His air forces were organized into 4 groups stationed in Beidaohe, Lu Yongxiang, Chaoyang, and the Zhili Aviation Department. They had over 70 aircraft in total. On September the 14th, Jang Toolin, as commander-in-chief of the Fengtian army, led the men down the border area. Likewise, Wu Peifu did the very same from Liaoyang. On the 15th, the 23rd Brigade of Li Shanghai, part of Li Jingling's Second Army, engaged the Zhili 4th Battalion of Yijun Shenbiao around Yizhou, Jingguan, and Taimen. This effectively kicked off the war. From there, the war front would run along from Chaoyang to Jidong, with major battles taking place in Ruhe, Shanhaiguan, Chaoyang, Qifeng, Zhoumenmen, and Shimenjai. The Fengtian forces planned to unleash their offensive against Shanhaiguan once the initiative was won in Ruhe. Therefore, Zhang Toolin personally led the battle in Ruhe. The first Fengtian army divided into a north and south group. The southern group attacked from Beijing, passing through Chaoyang and Lingyuan to enter Shifengkou, with Wu Zhefeng's cavalry as the main force. The north group ran from Tongliao to Keilu, then headed south from Chengde via Qifeng. They would launch an attack on the western part of Shifengkou. The southern attack went pretty smooth as the Zhili army did not put up a serious resistance. On the 16th, the Fengtian forces seized Yuzhou and Fuxin. After this, they concentrated their attacks against Chaoyang. Liao Fufu defended Chaoyang with the Zhili 26th Brigade of the 12th Division, but he only put up a symbolic defense. He quickly abandoned the city upon the enemy actually attacking. On the 23rd, Chaoyang was occupied by Fengtian forces, who scoured the countryside afterwards. Meanwhile, the northern group attacked Jianping, Lingyuan, and Qifeng. During the battle for Lingyuan, the Fengtian encountered determined resistance from Zhili forces led by Wang Huiqing and Dong Zhenguo. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, but the Fengtian managed to take the city. Simultaneously, the second Fengtian forces led by Shu Lanzhou and Wu Guangxing attacked Qifeng. The battle for the city raged for a few days, seeing Fengtian air forces bomb the city until October the 8th, when it was finally captured. The fall of Qifeng marked a decisive moment in the battle for Ruhe. The Fengtian had taken the initiative by that point. Now the leading Fengtian troops began a rapid advance towards Lenkao, sitting at the very foot of the Great Wall. Both sides knew the entire battle depended on Shanhaiguan. The Zhili had heavily fortified it, and following the loss of Ruhe, they continued to strengthen it. Wu Peifu dispatched Peng Shaoxin to set up defenses at Shanhaiguan. Jang Toolin had sent Zhang Dangshen and Zhang Shuliang to form a new headquarters near Shanhaiguan, as Guo Songling led the 2nd and 6th Brigades to frontally attack it. As Guo Songling did so, Zhang Dangshen and his deputy commander, Han Linchun, led the 4th and 16th Brigades to face the Zhili forces north of Zhoumenmen. Small-scale battles broke out on the 17th that gradually escalated into larger ones. On the 29th and 30th, the Fengtian forces began unleashing artillery and aerial bombardment upon the Zhili positions between Shanhaiguan and Changli. During that process, the Fengtian forces seized Wangjiatuan, Langwang Temple, Yaozhaizheng, and other towns. By October the 4th, the Fengtian army approached the position of the Zhili 15th Division. On the 7th, Zhang Toolin issued a general attack order sending Fengtian forces across the board. The first line of Zhili troops relied on the solid fortifications, and they fired back upon the advancing enemy. The Fengtian forces gradually turned their attention to the Zhoumenmen Gate, located at the northwest part of the Shanhaiguan Pass. On the 8th, Zhang Dangshen personally led the 19th Brigade to attack the Huangtu Ridge on the north side of Zhoumenmen. His forces quickly encircled Zhoumenmen before the 2nd and the 6th Brigade stormed and occupied it. The fall of Zhoumenmen would severely demoralize the Zhili defenders, whose lines began to waver. The Fengtian forces then began breaching lines, capturing places like Liu, Waiyu, Xiangmaiyu, and then they outflanked Shanghanguan. At this point, a brigade was sent to attack Shimenjai along the north side of Jiaomengtou. Shimenjai is roughly 25 kilometers away from Shanhaiguan. If captured, the Fengtian could use it as a springboard to attack Qinhuangdao, cutting off the Zhili army's line of retreat. In order to protect the line of retreat, Peng Shouxin organized a force to reinforce Shimenjai. On the 11th, Wu Peifu came over to Shanhaiguan while also inspecting Shimenjai, Jiaojiayu, Shaohujai, and other significant Zhili positions. Seeing Zhou Manmen had fallen, Wu Peifu ordered his forces to recapture it on the 14th. The Fengtian defenders there were put into a desperate battle to hold on to it. On the 15th, a Fengtian regiment led by Sun Shicheng broke through the Zhili defensive line. On the 16th, the Fengtian forces surged through the breach and they stormed Shimenjai. The Zhili forces routed in the area, allowing the Fengtian forces to quickly seize Liujiang. On the 17th, Zhen Shijiang led the Zhili 6th Brigade to reinforce the battlefield emerging north of Qinhuangdao. Now, at this point, we need to take a little step back from the battle because a lot of things were happening all over the place. Some things having a very deep impact on the war. While all this was going on in the far north, in the south, Dr. Sun Yat-sen was personally leading the KMT forces north to try and prevent the Zhili commander, Sun Quanfang, from reinforcing his Zhili comrades in the north. Yet, again, in a fashion that just kept reoccurring, an issue broke out in Guangzhou. The Guangzhou Merchants Corps and forces loyal to Chen Jiangming began an uprising in Guangzhou. Sun Yat-sen was forced to turn his army back to quell the rebellion. As Sun Yat-sen pulled back, Sun Quanfang had brought his forces into Zhejiang and Shanghai. Meanwhile, another ploy on the part of Jang Toolin paid off big time. The Christian General Fang Yuang, who was commanding the Zhili Third Army, began making some trouble. When the Zhili Second Army suffered its initial defeat, Wang Huaiqing sent word asking for help from Fang Yuang. Instead, he ordered his Third Army to stay put at the Gubeikou Pass. Now, back at the battle, when Wu Peifu had come to the front lines, he was taking charge of operations personally. Zhili reinforcements arrived from Henan and Shanxi, led by Zhang Fulai, and immediately began helping the counterattacks against Shimenjai. The Fengtian defenders also reinforced their lines, with Zhang Dongshan taking command of the front lines personally. Despite the reinforcements, the Fengtian defenses were beginning to crumble, their casualties were mounting. At the same time, the main Fengtian forces were fighting at Shanhaiguan, failing to make any progress. The Fengtian army received unconfirmed intelligence at this point from the Japanese that the Zhili clique had enlisted the Shangji Shipping Company to use 13 transports to move 4 divisions directly into the rear of the Fengtian forces via the Daku forts. The Fengtian commanders believed it was possibly Yingkou or Huludao, perhaps both where they would be landing. Many Fengtian commanders called for deploying the general reserves as a rearguard, but the deputy chief of the general staff, Fu Xingpei, opposed the idea, claiming the Jimenkou sector required them. Yang Yuting, the chief of the general staff, worried the terrain of Jimenkou was far too narrow and restrictive to deploy such large number of troops. Finally, Zhang Toolin ended the debate by ordering the general reserve under the command of Jiang Zuoxiang to rush to Jimenkou. Despite committing the general reserve, things did not improve. In fact, some interpersonal problems soon emerged. Zhang Shuliang and Guo Songling had secretly redeployed 8 infantry regiments and 2 artillery brigades from Shanhaiguan to the Jimenkou sector. These units were to be led by Guo Songling, but the artillery battalion commander, Yang Zhongzhou, a classmate of Guo Songling, was removed from command by the artillery regiment commander, Chen Chen. Upon hearing the news from Yang Zhongzhou, a rather enraged Guo Songling removed Chen Chen of command and he gave it back to Yang Zhongzhou. However, Zheng Dengshen and Han Lichun had both given approval to Chen Chen when he asked to remove Yan Zhongzhou, so now they were all kind of embarrassed. They then complained to Zhang Toolin about Guo Songling's actions. Zhang Toolin ordered both Chen Chen and Yan Zhongzhou to go back to their original commands, and this only further pissed off Guo Songling. Yes, it was some real kindergarten bullshit, and this led Guo Songling to take his 8th Infantry Regiment out of the battlefield and he retreated to the rear. Zhang Shuliang then hunted him down and smooth-talked him over to come back and engage the enemy. This entire stupid debacle could have very well cost them the entire battle. Fortunately, it happened at night, and the Zhili army was none the wiser, so they did not exploit the situation. Back over at the rear front, Zhang Toolin stormed the Lengkao Pass against 4 Zhili divisions, the 9th led by Dong Zhenguo, the 20th led by Yang Zitang, the 1st Shanxi Division led by Hu Jingyi, and the 23rd led by Wang Jingbing. Unfortunately, Wang Jingbing and Hu Jingyi had formed a pact with Fang Yuang, and they literally stepped aside during Zhang Zongchang's attack. To add insult to injury, Yang Zitang and Dong Zhenguo both hated each other, so each pulled back to preserve their own strength. Again, in the warlord era, petty warlords kind of pulled this shit off all the time. As Zhang Zongchang's forces attacked, basically everybody fled Lengkao. Seizing the opportunity, Zhang Zongchang pushed even deeper into the enemy lines. It was around this time word spread that the First Jiangsu-Zhejiang War had concluded in a Zhili victory. Thus, it seemed if Shanghai was not taken swiftly, the Zhili would simply win the war. Yet the dark horse that was General Fang Yuang finally struck. On October the 22nd, Fang Yuang betrayed the Zhili clique. Fang Yuang formed a truce with the Fengtian commander Li Jingling on the night of October the 20th. He then suddenly withdrew 8,000 troops of Wu Peifu's 3rd and 26th divisions, leaving only 4,000 men at their defensive line. He took said troops and he secretly stormed Beijing, where he performed a coup against President Cao Kun. At around midnight on October the 23rd, the commander of the Beijing Guards, Sun Yue, admitted Fang Yuang and his men into Beijing. Together they seized control over key government buildings and gates. Fang Yuang then forced Cao Kun to dismiss Wu Peifu from his military positions, stripping him of the presidency and placing him under house arrest. Afterwards, Fang Yuang issued a public statement denouncing the civil war and urging the warlords to settle their differences via negotiations. Fang Yuang's subordinates then took control of the railway line between Tianjin and Shanhaiguan, and the railway line at Jiangshutian, south of Beijing. Meanwhile, Yat-sen dispatched a force from Shanxi to seize the railway junction at Shijiazhuang, blocking any movement from Funan along the Peking-Hankow Railway. Thus, Chu Yuan and Sun Quanfang could no longer advance north to aid Wu Peifu. Back over at the battle, Zhang Zongchang saw the thinning of the defensive lines when Fang Yuang pulled his men out, so he stormed it alongside Li Jingling. Their forces broke through and advanced south along the Luan River towards Luanzhou, then in the direction of Tianjin. They seized the train station at Luanzhou, as Sun Shichang's 10th Brigade captured Jumenkao. The Fengtian cavalry then stormed the Shifengkou Pass and they pushed forward. By this point, the Zhili morale had all but disappeared, as news of Fang Yuang's coup in Beijing was spreading along the lines. Even the crybaby, Guo Songling, hearing the news, grabbed his force and performed an all-out charge into the Zhili lines, breaking through and advancing eastwards. Now cut off between Qinhuangdao and Shanhaiguan, on the 31st of October, many high-ranking Zhili officers began fleeing via ships at Qinhuangdao. Countless Zhili forces were surrounded and they began mass surrendering. Wu Peifu, meanwhile, fled first to Tianjin, where he began frantically telegraphing Zhili armies in Jiangsu, Henan, Hubei, and Zhejiang for help. Things got even worse. More railway lines were being cut by the Anhui clique members such as Zhang Shiqi in Shandong, Kangzhou, and Machang. Likewise, Zhang Shishang had cut the lines of the Jinpu Railway at Hanzhuang, and even Yang Qishan had come out of his turtle shell to cut off the Jinghai Railway over at Shijiazhuang. The Fengtian army overran Tangshan and Lutai as Fang Yuang's forces stormed Yangqun and Beitang, forcing Wu Peifu to flee to Juliancheng. It was at this point Duan Qire sent a message to Wu Peifu, advising him he should probably depart by sea. Completely surrounded and with no allies, Wu Peifu did just that. He fled with 2,000 troops on a transport, Huanjia, on November the 3rd. He went to Tanggu, where Sun Quanfang defended him. This had been the most impressive war of the warlord period up to this point. Nearly 450,000 troops had been involved in a month-long war along the Great Wall area from Shanhaiguan to Beijing. The casualties are really tough to estimate. Perhaps 20 to 30,000 had perished. After taking Beijing, Fang Yuang reorganized his forces into the 1st Guomingjun Army, hiring his co-conspirators such as Sun Yue and Hu Qingyi, who would eventually lead the 2nd and 3rd armies. On November the 5th, Jang Toolin removed Emperor Puyi from the Forbidden City, and Puyi went into exile over in Tianjin, where the Japanese would actually scoop him up. Jang Toolin, Fang Yuang, and Duan Qire then met up in Tianjin, where they agreed to form a provisional government with Duan Qire as the figurehead. The choice of Duan seemed to be palatable to everyone, including the remaining Zhili warlords in the Yangtze area. On December the 9th, Duan government was recognized. Dr. Sun Yat-sen, of course, refused to recognize the new Beiyang government, and he would begin to flirt even more so with the CCP and their larger backer, the Soviet Union. For now, the Beiyang government, for whatever it was actually worth, remained in the hands of three players: Duan, who no longer possessed a real army; Fang Yuang, who had just shown himself to be quite a treacherous man and did not wield a very strong army; and lastly, Jang Toolin, who now wielded the largest army in all of China. And he was backed by Japan, and he controlled vast sums of territory. It seemed that China had just seen its first triumvirate. I would like to take this time to remind all of you this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube. Over there I'm releasing a new series on the Japanese invasion of North China and Inner Mongolia. Also, please check out my growing Patreon account over at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where for as little as $2 a month you get access to the exclusive Patreon podcast, early access to all of my content, and voting rights for what I will tackle next. So the first Jiangsu-Zhejiang War and the second Zhili-Fengtian War were now over. It seems Jango Lin had just become king of the hill. But what did that mean for China? Would Jango Lin pursue a policy of reunifying China? Would he expand south? Or would the chaos simply continue? What do you think?